Emmanuel Cleaver is the gift that keeps on giving. Good morning, Kansas City. Happy Friday. Glad you are here with us on KCMO Talk Radio. The weather's starting to turn. I'm thinking we're getting set for spring. Woo! Oh, my gosh. Life is good. Now, life is not good if you are Emmanuel Cleaver, if you are in the Democratic Party right now in Washington, D.C., because you have no answers. You are flailing in the wind. You are like the toddlers. I shouldn't say toddlers. You are like the kindergartners. I was chaperoning yesterday at the Big 12 women's basketball tournament. You're peeing all over the wall. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. Trust me, I was doing that. It was quite a doozy. As a girl dad, taking all the boys to the boys' room was quite a mess.
I was going to say, you weren't peeing on the wall.
No, I was not peeing on the wall. That was not me. But when you take a bunch of 5- and 6-year-old boys to go to the bathroom and you're a girl dad, you know, there's a first time for everything, I guess. I'm like, stop touching the urinals, kids.
Yeah, don't back up that far.
No. Oh, my goodness. We'll get to that at some point this morning. But that is right now the entire Democratic Party. They are the kindergartners that I'm dealing with and I'm watching in the T-Mobile Center Arena bathroom trying to, just go to the bathroom and do it without peeing everywhere and making a mess. And they just can't do it. So now Emmanuel Cleaver, very, very bothered by the possibility, not the likelihood, but Emmanuel Cleaver bothered by the possibility of a report from Reuters that President Trump and the administration is considering revoking temporary protection status for roughly 250,000 Ukrainians who came to the United States after Russia's invasion 3 years ago. The move would lay the groundwork for those individuals to be deported. Now, the White House has denied that report. The White House is saying no decision has been made, but that has not prevented the outrage from coming from people like Emmanuel Cleaver. He shared this story from Reuters, and the Kansas City congressman right here in town had this to say.
You mustard moo.
No, that wasn't what he said. Here's his actual statement on X. I wish he would say that every time. I wish he would sign his tweets or his X posts with just musty moo. That would just be gold, wouldn't it? But anyway, Cleaver wrote on X, Trump's cruelty knows no bounds. He's now planning to revoke legal status for 240,000 Ukrainians who fled Putin's war, just days after his embarrassing Oval Office meeting where he refused to commit to helping Ukraine. Turning our backs on our allies and refugees is disgraceful. You know what's disgraceful? That post from Emmanuel Cleaver. That's disgraceful. The guy is so out of touch with Kansas City right now. Send Emmanuel Cleaver back to his stomping grounds on the east side of Kansas City and ask them, those people who have struggled through record homicide rates the last few years. And I'm not saying this is Cleaver's fault. I'm just talking about how out of touch he is. Record-setting homicide rates the last few years. Not on him. 20% inflation. That is technically on him as a member of Congress who voted to print all this money the last few years. They've gotten poorer. They're getting hit the worst by inflation at the lowest ends of the income bracket. And the fact that a lot of these people, well, guess what? They're the ones who have to end up living with the 10 to 15 to 20 million people, depending on the estimates, that Joe Biden let walk into the country the last 4 years. Now, Ukrainians are actually legitimate refugees, right? But there are millions of people that have come in under these programs that Joe Biden has basically made up. I mean, he hasn't made up the programs, but he's basically rewritten some of the rules to allow a lot of people who came here illegally to claim that they are refugees, to claim that they are part of some, temporary protected status group. That has happened. We know that. We've done a lot of, reporting on it the last few years. And guess where they often end up living? Well, they're not living with Emmanuel Cleaver's friends in Washington, D.C. They're competing for housing with those working class and working poor folks in places like Kansas City. That's what they're doing. What does that do? That drives up the cost of housing in some cases. That means more competition for jobs. That's what's happening. And Emmanuel Cleaver is proving once again that he is woefully out of touch with many of his constituents. I don't know who's got him by the short hairs in D.C., if it's Pelosi, if it's Maxine Waters. I don't know. But this guy is not with the average Kansas Cityan right now. I promise you that.
Trying to use refugees as a euphemism for what we would call border crisis.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on here in some cases.
328. That is the number of ports of entry that are here for the United States. They're open.
Yep. Come on. Do it that way.
They're not closed. That's how you do it.
That's how you do it. There's a way for this to go. Instead, Cleaver's saying Trump's cruelty knows no bounds. He's now planning to revoke legal status for 250,000 Ukrainians. And by the way, that's not even confirmed. It's not. But it doesn't matter. It's just about get Trump. It's just about TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. That's all any of this is about. I just didn't think Cleaver would fall for it. Like, I know that he wins re-election by 15, 20 points, so he can probably say anything and no one cares. I mean, he's going to win re-election for as long as he wants. I get that. I do. But I also thought he would realize at some point that he's not in Los Angeles. He's not in New York City. He's not on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's still Kansas City. Still got parts of the Northland, right? Like, he still has some rural parts in his district. Not as rural as maybe it used to be, but he still has rural parts of the district. And even if it's not rural parts, there are working class stiffs in Kansas City who say, this is Emmanuel Cleaver's biggest gripe right now with Trump? This? Is there anything that Emmanuel Cleaver would say Donald Trump has done well? Is there anything he would say he agrees with? My guess is no, but you know what? He's out of touch then if that's the case. He just is. 913-408-7957. Trump was asked about this yesterday. The temporary, the status for Ukrainians and whether or not he is going to revoke that status for Ukrainians. And here's what he had to say.
TPS for the Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.
What about it?
Are you considering revoking the TPS status for the more than 200,000 Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.?
Oh, what are you saying?
The Ukrainians that are here in the U.S., they're under a TPS status.
Or GPS?
TPS, temporary.
Oh, I thought you said GPS.
GPS.
Yeah.
There was some news saying that they were going to be revoked and they were going to be deported from the country. Are you considering that for the
Well, we're
Ukrainians?
not looking to hurt anybody. We're certainly not looking to hurt them. And I'm looking at that, and there were some people that think that's appropriate and some people don't, and I'll be making a decision pretty soon. Okay?
All right, so Trump's saying, hey, I'll be making a decision soon on this. I love the back and forth. GPS? What GPS? No, TPS. GPS. I always say to politicians when they come on the show, don't use your dopey acronyms. It's inside baseball. Nobody knows what they mean. Just spell it out and say it out. If the reporter said temporary protective status, Trump would have understood it. Instead, he goes TPS. TPS, who's on first? That's what's going on there. And I love that Trump didn't know the acronym or didn't understand what the guy was saying. It's just, it's very Trumpian of him. But he did not say he's revoking the status. But that didn't stop Emmanuel Cleaver from sharing a Reuters report and just running with it because, well, get Trump. And after Tuesday night, I promise you guys, it's not working out for you like you think it is. I'm actually trying to do you a favor here, but seemingly none of them want to listen. So keep banging your head against the wall and see how that goes for you. Now, I've got another example. Data, polling that's out there from an outlet that you wouldn't expect to be producing results like this, which tells you and tells me all both of us need to know about where things are at right now when it comes to the spending in D.C. We'll share that with you coming up next on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio. We are streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app on a Friday morning. Weather's starting to turn in this town. Glad you're here on KCMO Talk Radio. You're okay. It's going to be all right. Yes, you and I are going to be just fine. We are on the side of the American people when it comes to cutting government waste, shrinking the size of government, Do not let national media, legacy media, or even local media here in Kansas City try to convince you otherwise. Don't do it, John. I know you're not, but some people are.
And we had a caller, I think it was Linda in Olathe, that had the point that people are equating a layoff of people with a lack of service, which isn't necessarily the equation.
No, not at all.
Right.
It's how do we find more efficiencies and save the taxpayer money? That's what's going on right now in Washington, D.C. But you look at how the town halls for certain Republican members of Congress, we've seen that for Roger Marshall in Kansas, Mark Alford in Missouri, have been received. Protesters are showing up, and it's all intended to create this narrative that isn't real. And the narrative is that, oh my gosh, look at these Republicans getting ambushed at their town halls. People are turning on them quickly. Oh, they don't like Elon. They don't like DOGE. They don't like Trump. Oh man, this is turning so fast. And then actual polling gets done. And the polling tells a very different story. CNN had this yesterday, where they had polling done on whether or not people think that Elon Musk should be involved with, obviously, cutting government waste and going through the bloated bureaucracies and trying to find savings on behalf of the American people. And guess what the answer was? You and me are not crazy. We're not. Here it is.
This, to me, was one of the more shocking figures that I saw. Made me go, wait a minute, hold on one second. Whoa. Americans on Trump and Joe's efforts. Musk and DOGE should influence government spending and operations. Look at this. 54%. The majority say that he and they should. How about approve of Trump trying to cut staff at government agencies? Again, you get a majority here. 51%. So, yeah, Elon Musk might not be that popular, but these cuts and the idea of spending cuts, at least within the federal government and cutting at government agencies, that actually has majority support. I was truly surprised by this, Kate, but the numbers are the numbers.
I'm not surprised. And you're probably not surprised. Now, you're being told you should be surprised. But, if you're, listening to this show and you get the pulse of the folks, you're not. So once again, since that guy on CNN is talking a mile a minute, let me just bring it back to you at 6:23 in the morning. You haven't maybe had that coffee yet. 54% of Americans believe that Elon Musk and DOGE should influence government spending and operations. And a majority approve of Trump trying to cut staff at government agencies. You would think that this is right around 30% based on how this thing gets covered. It's not true. It's actually very popular. People realize the government has gotten way too big and out of control, and they're done with it. And they want to see it shrink, especially because guess what? Those of us and those of you who work in the private sector, you're the ones paying the bill. And what the government is doing is making these jobs numbers look better the last few years, driving up our national debt, creating a larger deficit than we've ever had, to basically buy themselves some time. But at some point, there had to be pain. It couldn't go on forever. And that's what's happening right now. And thank goodness that's what's happening right now. It desperately needs to happen. It's frankly not a left or right issue. It has to happen. We don't have the money. And I'm sorry for those of you who think you can just tax billionaires forever, but the money's not there with the billionaires to make this happen. It's not. So here also is part of this CNN clip when it comes to wasteful spending.
Yeah, what do they think they're actually cutting? Democrats want to argue that the type of spending that Musk is cutting is mainly necessary programs, but that comes in at just 36%. The wasteful spending actually wins the plurality here at 42%, according to a recent Washington Post Ipsos poll. And I think that is the reason why you see that when it comes to Musk and DOGE, you see, in fact, the majority believe he should have some influence because they believe, the plurality believe, that he is cutting wasteful spending, not necessary programs that Democrats are arguing.
Tomato, tomato. I do like Dusk and Moj, though. I think we need to keep that around. But the definition of wasteful is...
Dusk and Moj. I like the sound of that. It's like, bro, slow down a little bit, all right? I mean, you can be high energy on TV or radio, but also just take a step back, think about what you want to say, and let your thoughts reach your lips and then speak. Now, we all do it, but that guy's just going a mile a minute. Slow down, brother.
Sounds like a new band name. Dusk and Moj. Here we are, live at the Starlight Theater.
Dusk and Moj. Opening act. Friday night, 7 o'clock. Don't miss out. Get your tickets, KCMOTalkRadio.com. It's like people are on board with this. Once again, the type of spending that Elon Musk is mainly cutting among registered voters. Most believe, or a plurality believe, that it's wasteful. Only 36% believe it's necessary programs. So when you have Kansas City Congressman Emanuel Cleaver standing outside federal buildings going on unhinged, bizarre rants.
You Mr. Moo.
It's like, I've got that in twice this morning. It's not even 6:30. This is going to be a hell of a day. It's like, no, you are not in touch with where the public is at on this thing. You're just not. Let's go to Riverside. Kirk is there. What's up, Kirk? You're on KCMO.
I think people kind of have to realize and look at it like, okay, look at your garage. You got a garage full of garbage. You've been collecting it for 30 years, 40 years, whatever. And you go, I'm going to clean out my garage. Do you go into your garage and take one thing out of your garage and go, yep, we're good, it's clean? Or do you go out and you clean the whole thing out, take it out in the yard, and start chunking stuff that you don't want and bring the stuff back in that you do want, or maybe you fix it and bring it back in? People have just lost their freaking mind on this.
They have,
Crazy.
Kirk. They have. And as someone who's getting nagged about the amount of crap in our garage right now, I can tell you right now that is a very good analogy. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You guys have a great day.
You hit a sore spot there, buddy, but I do appreciate it. We've all been there.
Bullseye.
Yep. And listen, it's not all my. I say, hey, what about all the kids' nonsense? We can't throw that away. What about all your garbage? Don't worry. Going to get around to it. This weekend or next weekend, it's on the to-do list. But Kirk's right. I mean, if I take one thing out of that garage right now, no one notices. You got to take a hammer to the entire thing. You got to break it to then try to fix it. That's where we are at right now. And it didn't happen overnight. There's no doubt that the Biden administration blew out the federal deficit and grew government at a rapid pace. But this has been going on for decades, and no politician has been willing to touch it until now. And guess what? It's got to be done. Coming up next, is there a turn in the culture war? Who might be leading that way? It's someone you wouldn't expect. We'll tell you next. I think we got Vince Colonnese filling in for Dan Bongino today, coming up at 11 o'clock, or as some call him,
Dan Bungie.
That never gets old, man. It really doesn't. But Vince will be taking over for Bongino with Bongino's blessing when Dan leaves next Friday to go work at the FBI. So Vince will start Monday the 17th. Know Vince well, and I know that you will love that show as well here on KCMO. Happy Friday. We have made it to the end of the week. We had a blizzard midweek. Now we're going to be pushing 60 degrees, and things are starting to turn next week going into the Big 12 tournament. So I'm fired up for that. I'm also mildly excited about the idea that a leading face of the Democratic Party might be realizing they went too far in the culture war. Now, this might not mean anything, big picture, but when I hear Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, tell Charlie Kirk that, there's something unfair about dudes competing against women in women's sports, I believe that there actually is some hope out there. I'm starting to think that we might just be turning a corner when Gavin Newsom, the governor of the bluest state in the nation, says, that's probably wrong. Here Gavin Newsom was on his podcast talking about this very issue when asked by Charlie Kirk about men competing against women.
Like, you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, right. that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out say no.
No, and I appreciate.
But would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's easy to call out.
It's easy to call out the unfairness. Okay, step in the right direction. I've got more from Newsom coming up. I just wanted to stop it there because that's the key line. He's admitting it's unfair. Now, he doesn't dive into why it's unfair, but obviously why it's unfair is because of the biological nature of men versus women. Men and women are different.
Talk about a bombshell.
I know. That'll be news to some of you. but men and women are biologically different. That's why it's unfair. So Newsom is saying something that no one at the top of his party has been willing to say for years. And they're getting crushed on this issue. People are not in agreement with them on this issue of men and women's sports. And Newsom is the biggest face in the party in years to admit that, yes, it is inherently unfair to young women. It is. But then he tries to do this little song and dance, toe the line, walk the line, whatever you want to say, where he is not willing to go all in. But I will give him credit for still admitting something that no one at the top of the party has been willing to admit for a very long time. Let's continue with Newsom.
Fairness of that. There's also a humility and a grace, that these poor people are more likely to commit suicide, have anxiety and depression. And the way that people talk down to vulnerable communities is an issue that I have a hard time with as well. So both things I can hold in my hand. How can we address this issue with the kind of decency that I think, is inherent in you, but not always expressed?
I'm going to stop Newsom right there for a second. Okay? He's hearing what he wants to hear on this issue. When I hear people talk about it, for the most part, people who agree with me and likely agree with you on the issue, I hear plenty of decency. But I also hear people say, hey, you know what? I got to have respect, and I've got to have grace, and I've got to have humility for our daughters. And I've got 3 of them. I've got to back them up. I've got to have their back. I'm not talking down to anybody. I'm not. But I'm sorry, you can't just sit there and say, well, we have to let this happen because if not, somebody might, God forbid, hurt themselves. Somebody might deal with more anxiety or more depression. And has Gavin Newsom ever thought of the concept that the anxiety, the depression, God forbid, the self-harm, may not be tied to the conversations around this? It may be the driver of why people want to, God forbid, go out there and do things like change their gender when they're 14, 15 years old. They used to do things like go through emo phases. Maybe they grew out their hair, right? They were rebels against the man. John had his long hair days. Mark was an emo kid back in his heyday.
Early 70s, David Bowie, the androgynous thing where you're like, you can't tell. Then they were going for that.
I've only seen the photos, but yes, I will take you at your word.
Well, slightly older generation than I, but
yeah.
That one.
Mark, you had your emo phase, right?
Oh, yeah, the swooped hair and the tight jeans.
Yeah, that was your, rebelling against the man, so to speak. That when alt-rock was like a thing, when it was actually a format and a music genre. It was all part of the picture. But guess what? People got through it. They grew out of it. You can't grow out of this stuff that's being promoted and pushed right now. And the other thing is, it does create a very unfair situation for women. And that's what Gavin Newsom failed to point out and apparently fails to understand. His eyes are like starting to open. They're just like barely opening a hair. They're finally at least seeing some kind of a light. But my man, what you're not understanding, what you are not willing to admit, is that what this really is about is protecting women, because I am not looking at my daughters and saying, sorry, you got to play against the guy just because. Well, because there might be some self-harm there. There might be some depression there. Do we think about the potential depression that young women can go through because of situations like this? Do we think about that or no?
You mentioned his eyes opening. You can see in one hand the unfairness of it. And then he maintained in the other hand, he saw people talking down to the communities. And I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So are you talking down by having your opinion, Pete? Is that the confusion? Perhaps as his eyes open, he'll see that hand is actually empty.
Well, that's so true. That is so true. What this is at its core is really emotional blackmail.
Yeah, there you go.
He's like, it's unfair. He's admitting it's unfair for boys to compete in girls' sports. But they might kill themselves, so we basically have to give them what they want. That's the insinuation there from Gavin Newsom. So girls kind of have to deal with it. And you're not being nice if you sit here and try to defend women and young girls from only being allowed to compete against themselves and each other. And that is still very disingenuous. But I will say, for a party by and large that has not been willing to even get that far on the issue, there are some strides happening. I think Newsom's running for president. I think that's what this is all about.
Yeah, there you go.
He is running in 28. To his credit, he's doing a podcast with Charlie Kirk, which is very smart. I've often said Republicans or conservatives in general are far more willing to talk with Democrats than the other way around. Democrats, the party of tolerance, are much less likely, it seems, in many cases, to want to interact with conservatives or debate with conservatives because, well, they're just racist, homophobic, and all the other isms anyway. And I think in large part, our side will say, hey, I want to get Quentin Lucas on the show. I want to have the Musty Moo Moo Man, Cleaver, on the show. I want to get Sharice Davids on the show. Quentin, to his credit, comes on every week. The other ones are tough to get a hold of. But I will gladly have him on the show. Jason Kander, I'd love to have him on the show. Nick Wright infamously came on this show a year and a half ago. I would do that every week if he would do it. Yeah, it was after a year ago. It was after the Super Bowl shooting. But, like, man, I that is good. We've got to have those conversations. But it usually only cuts one way when it comes to which side is willing to have those debates and those intellectual forums to go back and forth on issues.
Gavin needs to be careful on his move into the middle of the road. He might run into Laura Kelly out there, right?
Yeah. Well, he's clearly trying to rebrand himself. But we can't forget he has signed some awful policy, and he has run a state that is losing people left and right. California has been shrinking for the first time in its history under Gavin Newsom. But he's slick, man. I will say this much. He is very slick. He's got the looks. He's kind of coming off like a guy's guy and a dude's dude. And frankly, I think for the most part he is. He has just been dragged to the left by his own political party, and he's been trying to save his own political skin, but he's realizing it's not the way forward if he actually wants to win a national election. So from that standpoint, he's smart, but I still wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. Big news story in Kansas City today is Brian Platt, Kansas City, Missouri city manager, been here for the last few years, is right now suspended with pay. This was announced yesterday, and it comes one day after the city had to settle a $1 million lawsuit, technically $900,000, with Chris Hernandez. He's a former TV broadcaster in this town. He is was then a worker, a communications guy for the city of Kansas City, Missouri. And he sued a few years back because, well, he said that he was told by Brian Platt to basically lie to the media, fudge some numbers. And he didn't want to do it. He then claims he got a demotion because of that, and that demotion put him in a tough spot because he couldn't advance in that role that he was in. So he ended up suing the city. And yesterday, he got $928,000 in damages. $228,000 was due to his demotion from the communications job he had for 9 years, and the jury awarded him $700,000 because Hernandez felt he had no other choice but to retire early from the city at age 58 because he transferred to another city job with far fewer responsibilities and no chance for advancement. I know a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, whistleblower, Chris Hernandez, what a guy. I kind of assume that politicians in general and city managers fudge numbers to us. Like, you're not going to convince me that in a decade, in a communications job with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, Chris Hernandez told us the truth every single time. I just don't believe that. I think a lot of this is personal. I think a lot of this is someone who had beef with his new boss. And now, because trial lawyers are looking for cases left and right, you can kind of sue whoever you want. I was told by a couple of people who know the inner workings of Kansas City, Missouri very well over the last 24 hours, that this city is dealing out and settling lawsuits for mid to high six figures left and right. I mean, people know if they get let go, the water department apparently is a mess. They can basically sue, and they can get themselves a couple $100,000. Easy peasy. This city is wasting your money on these lawsuits left and right, and something's got to be done about it. It might take state legislation, and I know Jeff City's not really looking out for Kansas City, but they should be looking out for the taxpayer because it's really getting out of control. And while I know it's easy to say, yeah, go whistleblower. Yeah, you stand up to the man. You stand up to the big bad city manager who wants to lie to the people. I mean, I can't help but see through that a little bit here. And I think it would be naive to not take this for what it is, which clearly is petty internal politics. I mean, who said Chris Hernandez had to stay as an employee with the city of Kansas City, Missouri? Right? I mean, it's a free market out there. If he wanted to leave, he could have left and found another job. The notion that you have to stay in your job and that job has to provide you with the career advancement that you want, they don't owe you that. They don't owe me that here at KCMO. If I feel like one day, my career is better off advancing in some other way, I don't want to do it. But if I feel like I have to, I will. That's how it goes in the real world. You make those choices. So I'm not going to, play the violin for Chris Hernandez here in all this. But I understand the city is like, brother, you just cost us $1 million. You got to be a little smarter. And that's the one thing I had heard from some people down at City Hall. That Platt at times might be a little too lackadaisical in some of the things that he says to certain people or in group settings. It might be a little too loose-lipped in some cases. And that obviously in this environment where everyone's looking to pounce, everyone's looking to make a buck and find a settlement, that can obviously be costly to a city, and that's arguably what we're seeing here. And the other part of this also is that there are people on that city council who have wanted Brian Platt out for a long time. The east side of Kansas City has not liked Brian Platt for a long time. I don't really know why. I don't get it. I mean, frankly, I think there's an element to this of, he's a white guy. I'm just going to be blunt about it. There's an element to that I believe is the case as to why certain people don't like Brian Platt. I don't have a problem with him. I mean, he's come on this show whenever I've asked. He's talked about, clearing the roads and fixing the roads and the potholes and just kind of doing the job of a city manager, snow removal, doing the basic stuff that needs to be done. But there are certain people in this town who have had it out for him for a long time. And now this gives certain people the reason to continue to push to get him out of this role, John.
It reminds me when we first started the show and that caller would call and say, he's a progressive from back east.
Yeah.
That's kind of the deal. Didn't he come from Jersey?
Yes,
I think
did.
So.
Yes.
I don't know if that's part of it, too. We get real, protective around here anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really even simpler. I mean, I think it's just certain people wanted somebody else to have that job. And
can't discount that in this city.
No, you can't. And I think that's in large part what this came down to. And now basically the knives are out. And the city council voted yesterday to basically suspend Brian Platt without pay. And now with pay, excuse me. Thank you. Yes. And now what's going to happen, I think, is there'll be a standoff here. Will Brian Platt resign? Or will the city basically be forced to fire him? From what I can gather and what I hear, the votes are there to basically blow him out. So it seems like he's done. The question is, how does it end? And how ugly does it get at the end? But my guess and my bet right now is that Kansas City is going to be in the market for a new city manager here before long. And I don't see, based on what I know, how that's fair. If that's the right thing for the city, I don't believe that it is. But I do think that's where all this is going. Now, yesterday I was downtown. I was chaperoning a field trip for a bunch of kindergartners, elementary school kids, at the T-Mobile Center for the Big 12 women's basketball tournament. And it was a great time. But I got to tell you, the Big 12 made a huge mistake moving the women's basketball tournament up a week instead of continuing to play it at Municipal the same week as the men. T-Mobile was empty yesterday. Now, there were like 1,000 kids there because there were a bunch of schools doing field trips to the game, but it was K-State, UCF, and with K-State playing in the game. The place was empty. The top rafters were all curtained off, and there were maybe 1,000 people there outside of the school kids. Meantime, when that thing was at Municipal, what you would have is you would have fan bases come into Kansas City next week. They would watch their men's team. They might then bounce over to Municipal and watch their women's team. And it actually made a lot more sense for them to do it that way. You would get more attendance for the women's game next week than you would at T-Mobile this week. The whole premise was, well, we want the women to have the top facilities like the men. I'm sorry, if you're an athlete, you want to compete in front of more eyeballs. A basketball court is a basketball court. Is it really worth it to have less people watch you so you can then in turn change in a nicer locker room? Like, that's what we're talking about here. The intent was good by the Big 12, and I appreciate what they were going for. But I'm telling you, I want to see the women's game grow. And what I saw yesterday, I mean, yeah, it was cool to have field trips there, but let's be honest, it's not growing at all.
I'll be the geek and think, I'm not sure why you couldn't play them both parallel at T-Mobile.
Well,
You'd have earlier times, and we'd argue over who got the good times, I guess.
Yes, there was some thought of doing that, but I guess the breakdown of schedules just didn't work. That's what I was told, because I asked somebody that a couple of years ago, and it didn't work.
I think.
Mark?
Yeah.
K-State has a really good team this year, so I thought that they would get more crowd, but
no one
I
there.
guess not.
I mean, it was a bunch of retirees.
But to Pete's
K-State
point,
fans.
had they been parallel, even at two venues, you would have drawn, probably half the men's crowd to the women's game.
Exactly.
Right? Sure.
I mean, you would have had people coming down saying, I'll watch the K-State men here, I'll watch the women there. And Power and Light was dead. Now, I know the weather wasn't great yesterday, but there was nobody there. Not a single person at Power and Light yesterday as I'm walking through it at about 11 o'clock in the morning.
Are we trying too hard to bring extra money to Power and Light?
I don't think so.
Maybe with the two. Well, you'll have the big one. The men's will be more popular.
This was, as I understand it, the Big 12's decision. They wanted to give a better opportunity to the women.
Yes, about the venue.
That's what they wanted. But they've totally missed the mark on how you actually grow the women's game. You grow the women's game by getting casual fans who are there for the men's game, then over to Municipal for the women's game. But it's clearly you're not driving people exclusively downtown to the women's game. You're not doing it. I mean, I was walking around Power and Light afterwards and around downtown. I saw like one guy in a Utah sweatshirt, and frankly, he might have been lost. I'm not even sure if he was here for basketball.
Or realize Municipal was built in the 30s, but the basketball tradition of that arena should be played up more.
Yeah.
Just like Allen Fieldhouse.
Yeah, I'm down with that. I mean, whatever it takes.
NITs, NCAA tournaments have been played there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Didn't they do Final Fours there like way back in the day?
Sure, we've hosted.
Yeah, absolutely. So use that. Use the historic nature of the venue to promote it. Don't be like, oh, the locker rooms stink. Put it at T-Mobile. Couple of big media news stories I want to touch on two massive names that most of you will be familiar with, one on the sports side, one on the news side. Stephen A. Smith getting a 5-year, $100 million contract from ESPN. Can you believe that? My gosh, that's big-time money.
It's a little shocking, but...
Listen, I agree. It is. It's why you saw and heard Stephen A. talk about, I may run for president. And everybody knew that was nonsense. Now, it worked out well for him. He got on The View. He got on different news shows. He got on News Nation. He got a lot of attention out of it. But it was all nonsense. Not when you got a $100 million contract coming down the pipeline over the next 5 years. So that was announced yesterday. And then it's also being reported here that Scott Jennings of CNN is set to re-up with that network. Now, Scott Jennings has become one of the breakthrough stars on cable news. He is the one conservative voice that you hear in prime time on CNN for the most part. I mean, they sprinkle in a couple other people now and then. But this guy, every single night, goes into the Lion's Den. And he's on this show with Abby Phillips at night, and his clips seemingly always go viral. Because he's sitting there with a bunch of Democrats, and he's like talking some sense into them, explaining why Trump is appealing, explaining why they're wrong about X, Y, or Z. And he does it in a very smart, clever, and succinct manner. He's not a bull in a china shop. He's not there beating people over the head, but he's very smart about how he does it. And this has many folks upset. The Daily Beast, which is a left-wing online outlet, writes, CNN's MAGA panelist gets pay raise amid staff cuts and ratings crisis. Well, yes, CNN, like ABC this week, and like you unfortunately saw in some of our local radio stations, had some cuts this week. CNN did it. ABC News did it. Yes, it's happened in local radio, not here in this building, but it did happen. You might have seen some of the news on that. So all that stuff is happening because media outlets in general are going through a massive, massive change in terms of how people are consuming the product, where they're getting the product, and how you're selling the product. All that is happening right now in real time, and it's happening very quickly. So businesses need to adapt to that. But Scott Jennings getting more money is a good thing for CNN because he is right now arguably their biggest star. Now, CNN's ratings are actually up a little bit year over year. They're actually doing better than MSNBC in the advertiser demo, air quotes, of 25 to 54. Now, they're still a mile behind Fox, but, you know, they're better than MSNBC, so that's saying something. They're second of the big three right now. And think about the clips that you may see on social media, if you're on X or Instagram, whatever. He's the driver. Scott Jennings is the guy you see the most of. So those are the people that you need. When people are bringing you eyeballs, guess what? They get rewarded for that. That's true in any entertainment industry. So these people who are like mad that Scott Jennings has a job, well, frankly, people care more about what Scott Jennings is saying on on CNN than Anderson Cooper, than Jake Tapper, than any of these people. He gets way more attention. And he actually did a brilliant job last night, if you didn't see this. I shared this video on X yesterday at Pete Mundo. Did you see this video that was put together of like some of the most progressive members of Congress? They did like a Mortal Kombat video. You saw that, Mark? I knew you would see it.
Yeah, I even saw some of my lib friends making fun of it.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
They were even making fun of it?
Yeah.
So it's all like the wokest women in Congress, and they made it into like a Mortal Kombat video where they show like their stats, you know, their age, how long they've been in Congress, where they represent, a fun fact, and they're doing the whole like punching thing in the video. It's very goofy. And for a party that is hemorrhaging men, that video is the reason why they continue to hemorrhage men as a party. It's like, oh, we're losing this demographic. What do we do? Let's do this video, said nobody ever. And it went viral. And I shared it at Pete Mundo. You can see it there. It's just, they're just a bunch of dorks. I don't know how else to put it. It's just a dorky video. And anybody who thought that was a good idea, like AOC was in there and a couple of others, you got to be thinking to yourself, what planet are you living on that you think this actually helps you grow the party? It doesn't. Frankly, it does the opposite. So that video goes viral. Everybody's making fun of it. Mark said even his friends on the other side were making fun of it. It's so easy to make fun of. And Scott Jennings went on CNN last night and explained why this video was a bad idea and totally goofy. And it's like the panelists around him are so much in their own bubble, they are shocked by this concept. Here he is.
When you do something creative, you're going to get criticism, right? But I actually applaud them for trying to do something different. And here's the reality. 7 million followers, whether you think it's cringe or you like it, we're on CNN on a Thursday night, and we're talking about it on national TV.
But I guess my question is, to what end? I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. I mean, maybe you will get 7 million eyeballs, but, what is the point?
I am not accustomed to helping your party do anything.
Yep.
But let me give you some advice. This was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And if you read the comments today, Lord have mercy. Look, scrambling for new social media and communication strategies is not a replacement for fixing what's actually wrong. Your party has a 21% approval rating right now, congressional Democrats.
Well, let's talk about fixing what's wrong. Donald Trump is doing nothing for the American people.
He has a 50% approval rating.
But he's doing nothing for the American people.
And so
he's not lowering the cost of living.
He
tells lies.
Fix the policy and leave the gimmicks behind.
Yes, and
that is beautiful from Scott Jennings. Just absolutely gorgeous from Scott Jennings.
Between that and We Shall Overcome, it was kind of a rough day for those guys.
It was. They sing We Shall Overcome after Al Green got censured yesterday by the House of Representatives. We shall overcome. Oh, my gosh. And listen to how the conversation goes with Scott Jennings. This is every night. He goes, you guys need help. This is beyond dumb. You can't be doing this. And then what do they say? Trump! I mean, it just right away. It's like a reflex you don't even realize is happening. Kind of like when the doctor, doing the checkup kind of taps your knee and it just kind of flips out. You can't control it. They can't control themselves. The minute he starts pointing out the absurdity of some of these things, what happens? Trump! That's it. It's what they got. It's what they're hanging their hat on. And it's like, this is not going to go well for you guys. Let us help you. That's what Scott Jennings is doing. And that's what, sometimes I'm trying to help him in my own way here locally in Kansas City. But the good news is Sharice Davids was not in that video yesterday. Now, Emmanuel Cleaver also was not in the video, but that's because Cleaver, it was all women, first off. Could you imagine Cleaver doing his little, Mortal Kombat punching thing? That would have been funny.
I'm kind of
We
surprised
could bring
they
his
didn't
moo-moo.
I'm surprised they didn't ask Sharice. She was an actual fighter at one point.
Well, see, that's a great point. She was actually an MMA fighter. You would think it would make sense to have her on. And that's where you got to give Sharice Davids some credit. Whether it's her coming to this conclusion or it's someone around her coming to this conclusion, being in videos with AOC and Jasmine Crockett and the other most progressive members of Congress is not a good look for her. And she knows that, to her credit.
Yeah, Kansans don't want to see that. She knows that.
They don't want to see AOC along with Sharice Davids, along with Jasmine Crockett. They don't want to see that. And she knows what to avoid. I mean, she plays that middle-of-the-road thing to a T. It's not oftentimes how she votes, but it works. And she wins elections doing it. 913-408-7957, the studio line and the text line on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We are always streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Speaking of bureaucrats losing their jobs, did you see this? James Dennehy is in charge of the FBI field office in New York. And he got let go. He got blown out. And yesterday at the New York FBI office, this was quite a moment. He was forced out after Donald Trump wanted to remove a bunch of agents. And video surfaced yesterday of him being walked out by his staff as they are crying and cheering him on, and the bagpipes are playing. I don't know who hired the bagpipe guy, but someone hired a bagpipe guy, and this is what it sounded like on MSNBC.
An extraordinary scene outside of the New York FBI office in the last hour. Assistant Director in Charge, James Dennehy, who was forced to resign under pressure this week, left the building to cheers from hundreds of his colleagues and the sound of bagpipes. He was forced out after clashing with Donald Trump's Justice Department after the removal of senior FBI leaders and requests for the names of agents who worked on the January 6 cases. He told those gathered that he will be their, quote, best cheerleader on the outside. We'll be watching for that.
Did a head of state die? Or did a guy just get forced out of his job because he wasn't listening to his bosses? It's quite a video. I mean, people are tearing up. The bagpipes are playing. Last time I heard the bagpipes playing like that, I mean, my gosh, it was at a funeral for my wife's grandfather. This is James Dennehy leaving the New York FBI field office to the sound of bagpipes after saying he was forced to resign. Dennehy was forced to resign after previously telling his office to dig in following Trump's election win. It also comes after Attorney General Pam Bondi instructed FBI Director Kash Patel to launch an investigation into claims that the New York field office was hiding thousands of Jeffrey Epstein documents. This guy was in clear defiance of his superiors. He was insubordinate. And frankly, he should have been escorted out of the back door in shame, not walking out the front door to the bagpipes playing like he's some kind of freaking hero. Like, this stuff is not connecting with the American people. It's just not. No matter how you try to spin it. Like, no one's looking at this and being like, man, that James Denton. No one could even pick the guy out of a lineup 2 weeks ago. It's unbelievable. 913-408-7957. Did you see this, too, as well? This was probably one of my favorite clips from the week. Trump and his staff announcing a big month for women in this country. Oh, man. Mark, it should be in there. I'm sorry I'm not seeing the clip. But if you could, just pull that up on your computer. This is a great clip of Trump from yesterday in the Oval Office announcing that, this is a month that we're going to honor the women of America, declaring March Women's History Month. Here we go.
So 2 very special proclamations, the first of which is a proclamation that proclaims March 2025 as Women's History Month in honor of all the wonderful women in your administration, all the wonderful women in America, and in honor of everything you've done for women and this administration has done for women in just, a month and a half? So
yeah, we've done a lot. And women have done a lot for us, right? This is an honor. We have a wonderful woman here, Maria Bartiromo.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you, Maria.
Thank you very much.
Hello,
Mr. President.
Maria.
And thanks for all that you're doing for women.
Thank you. She's
Thank
going
you.
to do an interview of me later. Maybe I shouldn't do this interview. I should be like Biden, not do any interviews.
Biden. There's the old Sharpie. Sharpie's out. The long
That's
signature.
Great. Women, we love you.
We love you too, sir.
Thank you.
The other proclamation was declaring March as Irish Heritage Month. As a half Irish American, I will gladly take that. So thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Oh, my gosh.
Such a nice man.